Give some community feedback?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Like, we've been doing some sweet community outreach. Web of Tomorrow sponsored about $5 million worth of babies being born in South America.
I don't even know what to say to that.
Dang it. Welcome to the Web of Tomorrow. I'm your host, Riley Carrasquillo.
And I am Adam Harris.
Today we're going to be talking about functions, but we're going to do something a little bit different today and do a little bit of a GitHub highlight. We're going to feature something that's trending on GitHub so you can check it out. Adam, hit it.
All right, there's a cool repo on GitHub that's trending today. The organization is JavaScript Society. The repo is JavaScript Path. So it's basically just a list of books to master JavaScript development.
Cool.
And some of them are free and some of them are paid. The first one on here is Eloquent JavaScript, which we've mentioned before.
Yeah.
It's really good. So check it out and start that. It's JavaScript Society / JavaScript Path.
Dude, that's awesome. That is like super relevant to us right now. That's so funny.
Yeah, and one of these is functional programming, which is something I've been really wanting to get into.
Functional programming, it's where it's at. Modular, functional,
everything. Goes along with today, we're talking about functions.
Yeah, we are talking about functions today.
Cool. So what's a function?
So a function, according to Mozilla Firefox, so the developer network, I'm going to do this in my best definition voice possible. Generally speaking. Wow. It's just...
Why don't you speak a little bit more about that?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. It's just like when you're typing in front of people and you've been typing amazing all day, but the moment you need to show someone like a string or a statement or a string of functions or something, I don't know, you all of a sudden fat finger the crap out of it.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. Get it all out.
All right. Generally speaking, a function is a subprogram that can be called by code external or internal in the case of recursion to the function. Like the program itself, a function is composed of a sequence of statements called the function body. Values can be passed to a function, and the function can return a value. So let's put a little bit of a highlight. I love it. See how I just come in and out of character? It's awesome. Let's do a little bit of highlight though. Values can be passed to a function, and the function can return a value. That's probably the most simple part of that definition that we're going to start off with.
Yeah, well, first I just really like how it's called a subprogram, right? Because you can write a program completely without functions.
Yeah,
right?
That's true.
Just first do this, next do this, next do this, next do this. Just straight line down the page. But a function is a little mini program, and you can call that anytime you want. I think the best analogy I've heard for a function is that it's kind of like you're a boss as the programmer, and functions are your assistants. And so you tell the assistant, you give the assistant instructions one time. That's like when you first write the program, when you first write the function, it's when you're giving the assistant the instructions. And then you just tell the assistant from then on, you just tell them to do it, and they already have the instructions to do it.
Cool. Yeah, exactly. So a function, a good example of a function is, say that you're trying to do an arithmetic something or other. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about how a function is built and what it can do. So in this case, I've got some parameters. My parameter will be x and then some arguments. So those are the actual values that I'm going to throw in there ultimately. But say that I want to find out what 5 plus x equals at any given time at any point in time.
So you might call this function add5.
Yep, add5. So variable add5 equals function, and then I'm going to do a parentheses with my parameter of x, and then and this parameter can be pretty much anything you want. It just has to represent. It's more for your purpose of following the function and what you're actually going to be throwing in there, or what is going to get thrown in there. So in this case, x is what's going to accept an argument, a value that will go in there. So we say 5 plus x equals what? So 5 plus x in and of itself equals nothing, right? And so if I wanted to find that answer, what I can do now that I've built out this function, this add5 function, is that what you said originally?
Yeah, add5.
Add5 function, I can go into my console, so I build out this function, and then I take add5 parentheses and throw in 5, semicolon, and then hit enter. What do you think will happen?
It would return 10.
It will return 10, yeah.
Yeah, well, so actually, let's talk about what's in that function. What's the code that's in that function? It'd be something like return x plus 5, right?
Yeah, exactly. Sorry, that's true. That's a big point. Is yes. So actually, technically, it is doing that what I asked it to do, but you're not going to see it unless you use some keywords that, and not to be confused with keys and objects like I used in our previous week.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying keywords like return, console.log, alert. So
JavaScript has all these, they're basically reserved words. You can't use these words for variable names or anything because they're part of the language.
Exactly. And they're objects, I guess, in and of themselves. They're functions in and of themselves already. Methods that have been
sort of
created
like operators
Yeah, exactly. So if I put alert 5 plus x, and x being, what I'm allowing an argument to, x being what I'm allowing to accept as, accept values.
Yeah.
In this case, then when I put add5 parentheses and throw another, let's say 6 in this case, semicolon, and hit enter, then it's going to throw up a pop-up window that gives me that arithmetic. So it would be 11.
Oh, so now you're talking about doing an alert?
Yeah, so one of the most common things that people do is, I was just giving you an example that we've used in the past, but what most people commonly do is return.
Yeah. Yeah, so a function can accept as many variables into it as you want, or none, and then it can return none or one things. So it doesn't have to return anything, but it can return one thing if it wants to. Or you can do something else. It can just do a console log, or it can do an alert, or it can just manipulate the web page or something and return nothing.
Yeah, so technically, this is where we're getting into true programming. This is where we're trying to create a subprogram that will activate within our code at certain points of time. So another really good example for functions that kind of highlights how a function is a subprogram. So you have a page full of content, and you have a search bar that you want to pull certain things. So say I'm searching for names in a database. I have created, what I would have done is create a function that accesses those names in a database. And that database can be a JSON document. So JSON is just a way of storing, much
data.
like just storing data. Let's just keep it simple like that. And so I have this function that when I put a name into that search bar, it returns the name that I'm looking for, along with, I guess, any information that may be attached to that name as well.
Yep.
So that's a purpose of a function, and obviously functions can have many different types of purposes and uses.
So I kind of want to talk about the difference between a function statement versus a function expression.
Okay.
Because when you described the syntax there, I think basically what you're describing was a function statement. Because you said var add 5 equals function.
Mm-hmm.
So you're saying that's a variable, it equals this function. And that's like a complete statement.
Exactly, and it has like a function body, and
so that's a function statement. But I think what's more common and maybe a little bit easier to work with is where you just say function and then the name of the function, and then you've got the parentheses and the brackets.
Yeah, I think most people use that for speed. So if so the more common way of being taught it in classes is, that I get now I'm like lisping. I guess the more lengthy version, but yeah, you can take function and name it just right there and then.
So what can be confusing about a function expression is that you can't call that function before it was defined.
Right. It doesn't get hoisted up.
So I said that wrong. With a function statement, you can't call it before it was defined because it's a variable.
Wait, repeat that once again.
With a function statement, you can't call it before it was defined. But with a normal just expression where you just say function whatever, you can actually call it before you define it, which is nice sometimes. Sometimes you want to put all your functions at the bottom of your code, just kind of get them out of the way, and then call them up above.
So explain that a little bit more in detail then, because some people might not understand hoisting, and since we haven't even talked about that and where that comes into.
So let's talk about variable hoisting. When you say var add 5 equals a function, basically what happens is that at the very top of the file,
maybe we should talk about global versus.
Let's talk about scope.
Yeah, let's talk about scope, and then let's throw in some global versus. Global versus local.
If you define a variable inside of a function, then that variable is only accessible inside that function.
Yeah, so let's just explain that a little bit. Let's say variable number equals 5. And then in our arithmetic example, if I did do variable number, so if I put number in that function, then it would be 5 because I called it globally. I made it outside of the function. But if I go into the function as well and take that variable number and give it a new value, like 6, within that function, variable number will represent 6. So it's a hard thing to understand, hosting and scope and all of that, but what you need to understand is that if a variable is called outside of a function, it is global. If a variable is called inside of a function, then it's typically local, although that's also not necessarily true. It's kind of tricky.
Yeah, it depends on if inside the function you use the var keyword, then it's local. If you don't use the var keyword, you're just still accessing the global one.
Exactly, yeah.
And if you don't use the var keyword at all, then JavaScript says, all right, I'll just hoist this all the way up to the global scope.
Yeah.
I'll create a new variable because I don't see that there's a variable named this already, and it's global.
And a lot of advice would be centered around making as little as possible global, using things in a global way as little as possible, and making most of your things local as possible.
Yeah, I mean, making everything global might seem easier when you're first starting out, but it'll really start to muck things up.
And it will honestly be what you do for a long time. But then once you start getting the grasp of local stuff, and this is very important to functions, because functions can get really messed up with global and local kerfuffling.
Yeah. And then another thing that might be confusing as far as variable scope goes, if you're used to some other language similar, like C or Java, is that the only scope in JavaScript, this is ES5, is functions. In ES 2015, there will be block scoped, which means that you can have variables that only exist within a for loop or only exist within, a certain block other than a function.
Different cases of scope.
Yeah, so in ES 2015, you can use the let keyword and it will be scoped to that block.
Gotcha. Which is beyond me even. I that is like beyond comprehension, but like I haven't even done anything with that, or not much even. But yeah, why were we talking about this again? We were talking about it in the realm of functions.
Function statements and expressions.
Okay, yeah, exactly. So function statements and expressions. How is that? Let's tie that all back into those function statements and expression comment you made.
So if you just use a normal function expression where you say function then function name, then you can call that function from anywhere, whether you call it before or after that function was defined. And that's really nice. But if it's a function statement where it's var function name equals a function, then you can only call it after it was defined. Otherwise, that function name, it gets hoisted to the top and it's actually equal to undefined. So if you try to call it before it's defined, it will say undefined is not a function.
And you'll have a whole world of confusion.
And actually now...
man, I thought I did a really good job with that function. What happened? Because it's going to tell you undefined. And when we say undefined, we mean that when you're using your developer tools, it will tell you it's undefined.
Yeah, and it used to say, in Chrome Developer Tools, it used to say undefined is not a function, but they've updated that now where it will say, like, add 5 is not a function.
Gotcha.
It's super nice so you can tell what went wrong.
If you want to play around with functions and start just doing random stuff, because you can do a lot of really cool, fun variability type things, random assignment type things. Some really common, what we call toy problems, are such things like pendulums, or taking a string and flipping it around. And so you can do all sorts of weird stuff that lets you just practice creating functions that may not necessarily have any specific use case, but it exercises. It's a lot like a math problem, but not to be confused with the requisite math skills or anything like that. Math skills definitely do help, but yeah, there's like toy problems out there that you can practice with, and if you look them up, they can be pretty fun as well.
Yeah, one of the most common ones is Fizzbuzz.
Yeah, Fizzbuzz.
I'm not familiar with the pendulum.
The pendulum?
Yeah. What's that?
Maybe I just think of it as a pendulum, but it's when you take a string, like you take a function that accepts a string as its argument and then flips it around.
Oh, it's like a palindrome.
That's actually what I meant to say.
Okay.
Palindrome. Yeah, pendulum would be... I guess pendulum would mean that you actually produce both, but... so you get one going the one way and the one going the other way.
Yeah, who knows?
You can do all sorts of things. You can honestly do whatever you want with functions.
I did a toy problem recently that I really liked where the input is a time, like 1:05.
Yeah.
And then the output is a fuzzy time, where it would say 1:05.
So you use different wording here. This is cool because this is honestly something that developers do. So we said that your function accepts an argument, right? That is an input.
Yeah.
So when you throw something in there, that's an input, and then your output is what your function shoots out.
Yeah, what it returns.
Whatever it returns.
Yeah. Yeah, and you can kind of think of functions as like a black box, like a machinery. Like if you're using a function, you can think of it as a black box. All you need to know is what's the input and what's the output. So if you're using like JavaScript's built-in functions like absolute value, or math.abs.
Yeah.
It's a black box to you, but as long as you know the input and output, you can use it.
Exactly. And and they have several of those that could be used within functions in many different ways. So functions can be used within functions, and functions can be used within functions. And objects can be thrown into functions, and then, functions can be thrown into objects, and yeah.
Yeah. You can pass functions into functions. You can return functions from functions.
Functions can return themselves.
Functions can call themselves.
Functions can call themselves.
The definition there kind of mentioned recursion, which is calling a function calling itself. And JavaScript can kind of break if you get a recursive function that calls itself too many times, because it builds up this stack and then it just crashes.
Yeah, your browser will just crash, even if you're using just your console.
In ES 2015, they're going to have proper tail calls, which all that means is you're able to do, if you write your recursive functions correctly, you're able to do it in a much more efficient way where it won't be able to crash.
So I did want to talk about something that I kind of just jokingly offhand mentioned, but functions and objects. That's when we start getting into something called methods. And so, Adam, talk a little bit about what a method is.
Yeah, a method is just a function that is attached to an object.
Yeah.
So actually, I mentioned math.absoluteValue or math.abs. That's a function. ABS is a function of the math object. Sorry. ABS is a method of the math object.
Yeah. so I guess let's think of an example. Maybe like an example could be, like an everyday example could be if you click on a person's name in Twitter, and this is obviously not, I don't know if this is something that actually happens right now, but you click on someone's name and then automatically it creates a like tweet box so that you're able to tweet them. So that would be kind of like a method, right?
I mean, it could be. It depends on what the code looks like.
Yeah.
Could just be a function. Could be no functions. Probably not. They probably use functions.
Yeah, almost certainly.
Let me just go to a really trivial example.
Okay.
Say you've got a dog object, and the dog has a property of name. So you name the dog
Leia.
Leia.
That's my dog's name.
So dog.name is Leia, and then what else can you do? Maybe a few more properties like its age and weight. Those are properties. Those are just values.
So those properties have the keys attached to them. So the key in this case, dog.name, the name is the key, and the property or the value of that key is Leia.
And so then you could actually add some methods to that object by just saying that you give it a key of bark, but the value for that would be a function.
Yeah.
And it could do console log bark or alert bark.
Yeah, the function just, every time you call that object or that dog.bark,
and then you put the parentheses on the end to invoke that function.
Yep.
Or call that function or make it do its thing.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the interesting thing. That's where we're getting into really like true programming is, it has this process to it that can seem kind of confusing, but it comes out as, say you have a button that's attached to that object dog.bark, and you click it, and every time you do, it alerts rough, I don't know. That's what's going on in the background, and methods are really cool. They're reusable code that you can throw all over the place. So, you got dog.bark that you're using in this one button, or maybe you've got like your Tamagotchi, back in the day.
Oh,
you've created like a browser version of Tamagotchi, and every time you pet, quote unquote, you do this pet action on this dog, it activates dog.bark, and that dog goes rough.
Yeah, you should make that.
I should make that, huh?
Yeah.
Except for it already has been. That's not fun.
See, that's the thing with it, like these toy projects. It doesn't matter if someone's done it
That's
before.
True.
Right?
That's true.
It's for fun, and it's for your own learning and personal benefit. And I would encourage people to throw all those projects up on GitHub as you're making them. Do it in the open source. It's a lot of fun that way.
Yeah, because that practice is ultimately what makes perfect.
Yeah.
I'm going to be like Donald Trump and coin that, try to copyright it. So that's functions so far. Functions are going to show up all over the place in our future discussions, and they are the meat, I guess.
Yeah, I've heard it said a lot that functions are first-class citizens in JavaScript.
Mm-hmm. Yep. They're what you're going to be most interested in. You're going to want to look at them and see what's going on. So thank you for joining us for this probably pretty difficult and confusing discussion. Go read about it. go to that GitHub page
Yeah.
and access a bunch of those awesome free books that will teach you a lot about functions, like Eloquent JavaScript.
So good.
Yeah, probably one of my favorite ones. I was about to say the best one, but that's not true. They're constantly getting better and better, so there's lots of good stuff out there. So, yeah.
All right. Stay curious.
Next week, we're going to talk to Gandalf and talk about why JavaScript is his favorite programming language.
That should be interesting.
It's going to be magical.